hip-hop didn't just react this week, it detonated. One streamer said the wrong thing about Doechii, and suddenly the entire industry turned into a war zone. Crips were being summoned, threats flew, violence promised. But here's the thing nobody's saying out loud. For years, we watched Megan get dragged through hell. Cardi doubted. Lotto questioned. Nicki smeared. Black women in hip-hop have been gutted in public over and over. Silence, crickets, shrugs from the same men who claim they protect black women. But when Adin Ross disrespected Doechii, men in hip-hop lost their absolute minds. Jason Martin erupted. Glasses Malone threatened street enforcement. Joe Budden poured gasoline on the flames. So the question isn't why are they defending her? The question is why now? Why her? Why this moment? And the leaked truth behind this so-called protection just got exposed. Let me break down exactly what happened because the receipts are absolutely brutal. On January 6, 2026, Jason Martin, who's affiliated with TDE, completely erupted on social media. His exact words were, "Adin Ross disrespecting Doechii stops in 2026. He labeled Ross an outsider to the culture, who dared to speak aggressively toward a black woman and allegedly crossed a line that triggered an industry-wide backlash. Now think about that framing for a second. An outsider, someone who doesn't belong, someone who violated sacred territory. That language matters because it reveals what this really was. This wasn't about defending Doechii as a person. This was about defending territory, defending ownership, defending the invisible borders of who gets to disrespect black women and who doesn't. But it gets even crazier. Glasses Malone didn't just talk. He didn't just post. He straight up threatened street enforcement. Let that sink in. This man promised to press all the people around Adin Ross. He claimed he'd get Crips involved. Actual gang members mobilized over a Twitch streamer's comments. Reports say Adin Ross allegedly had to call WAC 100 for protection. That's not discourse. That's not accountability. That's a digital drive-by with real-world consequences. Fans online started dissecting every frame of this situation. They pulled up old clips, they compared timelines, they analyzed who said what and when. And the deeper people dug, the more the hypocrisy revealed itself. Joe Budden added fuel to an already raging fire. His exact words on his podcast were, "I'm rooting for Glasses Malone to get all the Crips together to Adin Ross." Read that again. A prominent media personality openly endorsed violence against someone over words. Now, I'm not defending what Adin said, but the response was wildly disproportionate. And here's where it gets really dark. Joe Budden's own platform helped spread the Doechii is an industry plant narrative just 1 year earlier, the very lie that strips black women of authorship and legitimacy, the same talking points that question whether she's talented enough, or connected enough, or authentic enough. So now he's suddenly her knight in shining armor? That's not evolution, that's image rehabilitation. That's damage control disguised as solidarity. Hip-hop didn't blink during this moment, it roared. The internet exploded with posts about black men finally standing up, finally protecting, finally showing up for black women. Media outlets ran headlines celebrating this so-called unity, but critics immediately started poking holes in the narrative. Where was this energy before? Where was this rage when Megan Thee Stallion got shot and had to defend herself in court while the internet called her a liar? Where was this mobilization when Cardi B faced constant accusations and disrespect? Where was this protection when Lotto dealt with colorism debates and dismissive commentary? The silence during those moments was deafening. But a white streamer embarrassed the culture, and suddenly everybody became activists. Suddenly everybody had principles. Suddenly everybody remembered that black women deserved respect. Online detectives turned into full-blown investigators during this chaos. They pulled receipts, they fact-checked timelines, they exposed contradictions. Fans created comparison charts showing which incidents got responses and which got ignored. The pattern was undeniable. When black women were attacked by other black people, the response was muted. When a white outsider did it, the response was nuclear. That's not protection, that's territorial rage. That's men fighting another man and using a black woman's pain as the weapon. Think about it. The loudest voices weren't centering Doechii's experience. They weren't amplifying her voice. They weren't asking what she needed. They were threatening against Adin Ross. The conversation became about punishing him, not protecting her. And that distinction matters more than people want to admit. Alleged leaked messages started circulating, showing how some of these defenders coordinated their responses. People claimed it was strategic, a calculated move to reclaim cultural authority, to remind outsiders that hip-hop still has rules and consequences. But at what cost? Using a black woman as the symbol for your power struggle without actually centering her humanity is exactly the problem that got us here. Doechii became a prop in a masculine turf war. Her actual feelings, her actual safety, her actual needs, all secondary to the spectacle of men performing protection. And the internet ate it up because it felt like justice. It felt like finally someone cared. But peel back one layer and the whole thing starts to rot. Now let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking into place and the picture gets disturbingly clear. To understand why this explosion happened, we have to rewind and look at the landscape of hip-hop's relationship with black women. Over the past 5 years, it's been a pattern of neglect, dismissal, and outright hostility disguised as critique. Megan Thee Stallion's shooting in 2020 became a public spectacle where she had to prove she was a victim. Tory Lanez supporters harassed her relentlessly. Memes mocked her pain. Industry figures stayed silent, or worse, cracked jokes. Where was the mobilization then? Where were the threats of street justice? Where were the men ready to summon gang affiliations to protect her? Cardi B, despite achieving massive commercial success, has faced constant questioning of her legitimacy. People call her music trash. They claim she doesn't write her bars. They reduce her to her past. They refuse to acknowledge her artistry. The disrespect is constant and public. Yet the same men who exploded over Doechii barely said a word during Cardi's worst moments of public dragging. Latto dealt with colorism debates, where people openly said she benefits from being light-skinned and that darker women don't get the same opportunities. That's a direct attack on black women in the industry. It's saying your blackness is graded on a scale. Where was the industry outrage? Where were the calls for accountability? Silence. Absolute silence. Nicki Minaj has been feuding and fighting for respect for over a decade. Whether you agree with her methods or not, she's faced relentless misogynoir. People call her crazy. They dismiss her complaints. They frame her as difficult. The same behavior that gets male rappers called passionate or competitive gets her labeled as bitter, and the industry largely shrugged. So when Doechii faced disrespect from Adin Ross and suddenly the entire industry mobilized, it didn't feel like progress. It felt like convenience. It felt like men finally had an acceptable target, a white man outside the culture who they could unleash on without facing internal consequences. Let's talk about Joe Budden specifically, because his role in this is particularly revealing. Just 1 year before this incident, his podcast was a platform where guests and co-hosts discussed whether Doechii was an industry plant. For those who don't know, that term is a weapon used against artists, especially black women, to delegitimize their success. It suggests they didn't earn their position, that someone in power artificially elevated them, that their talent isn't real. It's a way to strip authorship and agency, and Joe's platform helped amplify that narrative. So his sudden righteous anger feels performative. It feels like he recognized he was on the wrong side of public opinion and needed to correct course loudly. Glass's Malone's threats of gang violence reveal something even darker. The idea that Crips need to be involved shows how quickly black women's pain gets weaponized for male posturing. This wasn't about making Doechii feel safe. This was about humiliating Adin Ross, about showing dominance, about proving that hip-hop still controls the narrative and the consequences. But here's the thing, that same street credibility that Glasses invoked has been used to harm black women countless times. Gang culture isn't exactly known for protecting black women, so invoking it now feels hollow. It feels like using the symbols of masculinity and violence to perform protection without actually creating safety. Jason Martin's framing of Adin as an outsider is also telling. It suggests that insiders get a pass, that if someone within the culture disrespects a black woman, it's an internal matter, but if someone outside does it, it's war. That logic is exactly why Megan, Cardi, Latto, and Nicki didn't get this level of defense. Their attackers were often internal, other rappers, other media figures, other fans, and the culture circled the wagons to protect itself, not the women being harmed. The rules only apply when it's convenient, when it makes the culture look good, when it allows men to flex their power without accountability. Think about the financial and social incentives at play here. Defending Doechii publicly against a controversial white streamer is good optics. It makes you look progressive. It makes you look like you care about black women. It earns you social capital. But defending Megan against Tory meant picking sides in a messy situation. Defending Cardi meant going against popular opinion that dismissed her. Defending Nicki meant aligning with someone the internet loves to hate. Those defenses come with social costs, so men stayed quiet. But Adin Ross is an easy villain, a white man with a problematic history who nobody in hip-hop has loyalty to. It's risk-free heroism, and that's exactly why it happened. The timeline reveals everything. Years of silence, years of complicity, years of looking the other way while black women got dragged. Then one white streamer crosses a line and suddenly everyone finds their voice. That's not accountability, that's optics management. And the saddest part is how many people fell for it. How many people celebrated this as progress without questioning why it took this long. Why this woman? Why this moment? The answer is uncomfortable. It was never about protecting black women. It was about protecting the culture's ego. But here's the part that really hits different. And honestly, this is where the whole situation breaks your heart if you're paying attention. Doechii didn't ask for this war. She didn't request an army of men to fight on her behalf. She didn't co-sign gang threats or violence, or the spectacle that unfolded. What she did do was create art that asked one devastating question. What's the agenda when the it girl black? That line from her music cuts deep because it exposes the conditional nature of support for black women. You're celebrated when you're useful, when you're marketable, when you're palatable. But the second you step outside those lines or someone attacks you, the support evaporates. And hip-hop just answered her question, loudly, accidentally, brutally, honestly. They showed that the agenda is control. The agenda is optics. The agenda is protecting the culture's image, not the women within it. Because if this was really about Doechii, her voice would have been centered. Her needs would have been prioritized. People would have asked how she felt, what she wanted, what would actually make her feel safe and supported. But that didn't happen. Instead, men turned her into a symbol, a flag to plant, a hill to die on. And she had to watch as her pain became performance art for male egos.
The footage and posts from that week show something really telling. Doechii's own responses were measured. She didn't call for violence. She didn't co-sign the threats. She seemed almost uncomfortable with how big this got. And why wouldn't she be? This is a woman who's been doubted, questioned, and dismissed, who's had to prove herself over and over, who's faced the industry plant accusations that tried to erase her work. And now suddenly everyone cares? But they didn't care when she needed quiet, consistent support. They didn't care when the rumors were spreading. They didn't care when she was being smeared. They only showed up when it became a spectacle, when there was an enemy to fight, when it made them look good. That's traumatizing in its own way, to realize that your protection is conditional, that your value is determined by how useful your pain is to someone else's narrative. Black women in hip-hop have been saying this for years. Megan said it after her shooting. Cardi has said it in interviews. Lotto has spoken about it. Nicki has screamed it. They're not asking for saviors. They're asking for consistent respect, for basic human dignity, for people to care about them as whole people, not just when it's convenient. And this situation with Doechii proved they still don't have that. You can see it in how quickly the conversation shifted away from her. Within days, people were debating Adin Ross, debating Glasses Malone, debating Joe Budden, debating the ethics of gang involvement, debating free speech versus accountability. And Doechii, the actual person at the center of this, she faded into the background. Her humanity flattened into a talking point. That's the emotional violence nobody wants to name. Being used as a weapon in someone else's battle. Having your pain turned into content, into outrage, into clicks, into social currency, and then being forgotten once the next controversy drops. This isn't just about one incident, it's about a pattern, a cycle. Black women get harmed, people ignore it until it's unavoidable, then there's a performative explosion of support, then silence again, and the women are left to pick up the pieces alone. Doechii will remember this. She'll remember who showed up and why. She'll remember that the loudest voices weren't asking what she needed, and that's the tragedy. The so-called protection she received might have done more harm than good, because now she knows the support isn't real, it's tactical, it's temporary, and it'll vanish the second it stops serving someone else's purpose. Now let's dig into the receipts from cultural critics, because this is where the academic and intellectual community started ripping the mask off this whole performance. CBC Arts, one of Canada's premier cultural analysis outlets, published a piece that asked one simple, devastating question. Where was this energy before? That question became the rallying cry for everyone who saw through the performative outrage, because it's the right question. It's the only question. If hip-hop truly cared about protecting black women, this energy would have been present for Megan, for Cardi, for Lotto, for every black woman who's been dragged publicly. But it wasn't. So what changed?
The answer is the target, the villain, the optics. Elle Jones, a prominent cultural critic and activist, took it even further. She wrote that men are using black women's victimization as weapons in battles between men. Read that again, because it's the entire thesis of this disaster. Doechii's pain wasn't centered, it was weaponized. It became ammunition in a fight about cultural authority, about who gets to disrespect black women and who doesn't, about maintaining hierarchies. Adin Ross wasn't attacked because he hurt Doechii. He was attacked because he embarrassed hip-hop, because he made the culture look weak, because he violated an unspoken rule. And Doechii just happened to be the excuse. That's not solidarity, that's strategy. Jay Smooth, who's been a voice in hip-hop commentary for decades, added another layer. He pointed out that hip-hop has spent years feeding audiences the same content that trained people like Adin Ross to disrespect black women in the first place. Think about how many rap lyrics degrade women, how many music videos objectify them, how many interviews dismiss their concerns. Hip-hop created the culture that taught Adin it was acceptable to talk about black women that way. And now the same industry wants to act shocked, wants to play the protector, wants to pretend they weren't complicit. The monster they're attacking, they helped create it. They fed it. They profited from it. And now they want credit for fighting it. Fans online started pulling up old tweets and posts from these defenders. Screenshots circulated showing times when Jason Martin liked posts that disrespected other women, times when Joe Budden made dismissive comments about female rappers, times when Glasses Malone co-signed content that was blatantly misogynistic. The internet never forgets, and the hypocrisy was glaring. These men weren't consistent protectors. They were opportunistic performers. They showed up when it benefited them, when it was easy, when the villain was acceptable. But their track record showed they'd been part of the problem for years. One Twitter thread went viral, breaking down every major incident of a black woman in hip-hop facing public disrespect over the past 5 years. Megan's shooting, Cardi's constant dismissal, Lotto's colorism debates, Nicki's feuds, Summer Walker's anxiety being mocked, Saweetie's relationship drama being turned into jokes. The list went on. And next to each incident, the thread showed which major male figures spoke up. The results were damning. Most stayed silent. Some even participated in the disrespect. But when Doechii's moment came, suddenly everyone had a voice. The inconsistency was the evidence. The selective outrage was the confession. Academic papers started being written in real time. Scholars pointed to this as a textbook example of misogynoir, a term coined by Moya Bailey to describe the unique hatred aimed at black women, where racism and sexism collide and create something even more toxic. Misogynoir isn't just hating women, it's specifically targeting black women, questioning their credibility, doubting their pain, stripping their agency. And hip-hop has been running this playbook for decades. The Doechii situation didn't break the pattern, it reinforced it. Because even in her so-called defense, she was objectified, turned into a symbol, used as a prop, her full humanity ignored. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to unpacking the hypocrisy. Hosts brought on guests who'd been critical of hip-hop's treatment of women for years, and those guests weren't celebrating this moment. They were mourning it, because it confirmed what they've been saying all along, that hip-hop doesn't actually value black women. It values the appearance of value in them. It values the social credit that comes from performing care. But when it's time to do the unglamorous work of consistent support, of calling out internal problems, of holding themselves accountable, the industry goes silent. This was just another example, another performance, another betrayal disguised as protection. Journalists started investigating the financial incentives behind these public statements. Turns out some of the loudest offenders had projects dropping soon. Albums, tours, media deals, and publicly defending a black woman against a controversial white figure is great PR. It makes you look conscious, woke, socially aware. It appeals to younger audiences who care about these issues. So the timing wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. And that's the part that makes this so sinister. Even the defense was calculated. Even the outrage was branded. Doechii's pain became marketing material, and nobody seemed to care as long as it looked good on social media. The evidence kept stacking up. Old interviews resurfaced where these same men dismissed Me Too, where they defended abusers, where they said women were too sensitive, where they claimed hip-hop was being unfairly targeted by feminists. And now those same voices wanted to be heroes, wanted to be protectors. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. But the internet has receipts, and the receipts showed this wasn't growth, this wasn't evolution, this was convenience. And the moment it stops being convenient, the protection will evaporate.
just like it did for every other black woman in hip-hop who needed it. Behind the scenes, while all this public drama was unfolding, there were side stories and smaller moments that revealed just how deep this situation went and how many people were trying to capitalize on the chaos. A Change.org petition launched, titled "End the Targeting of Black Women in Music." It gained thousands of signatures within hours. People thought this was organic, grassroots activism, but deeper digging revealed the petition was started by an account with no prior history, no other campaigns, no connection to activism. Some speculated it was started by someone trying to ride the wave of outrage for clout. Whether that's true or not, the fact that it's even questionable shows how commodified black women's pain has become. Social media exploded with posts from influencers and smaller creators, all trying to give their hot takes. Everyone wanted to be part of the conversation. Everyone wanted their viral moment. Tweets with phrases like "Black men rallied to defend Doechii" got hundreds of thousands of likes, but if you read the replies, it was a war zone. Half the people were celebrating, the other half were asking where this energy was before. The split was revealing. It showed that a significant portion of the audience wasn't buying the narrative. They saw through the performance. But the algorithm doesn't care about nuance. It cares about engagement. So the outrage kept spreading regardless of whether it was genuine. Podcasters who'd never mentioned Doechii before suddenly dedicated whole episodes to her. They acted like they'd been fans from the start, like they'd been following her career closely. But fans who actually supported Doechii from the beginning called out the bandwagon energy. They posted screenshots showing these same podcasters had ignored her album releases, had skipped her singles, had never interviewed her. But now that she was trending, now that her name was attached to controversy, suddenly everyone cared. That's the digital age in a nutshell. People don't care about you. They care about what association with you can do for their brand. Adin Ross himself became a secondary character in this drama. Reports said he was genuinely scared, that he didn't expect this level of backlash, that he thought he was just making edgy jokes like he always does. Some people felt bad for him. Others said he deserved everything he got. But here's the thing. Adin's behavior didn't exist in a vacuum. He learned it from somewhere, and a lot of that somewhere was hip-hop itself. The same culture now trying to destroy him taught him that talking about women that way was acceptable, was entertaining, was content. So the outrage directed at him felt misplaced. He's a symptom, not the disease. Meanwhile, Doechii's team stayed relatively quiet. No major public statements, no interviews addressing the situation directly, and honestly, that might have been the smartest move, because anything she said would have been dissected, twisted, used against her. If she thanked the defenders, people would say she co-signed the violence. If she distanced herself, people would say she was ungrateful. There was no winning move, so silence became strategy. Let the men fight their battle, let the internet have its moment, and then move on. Because at the end of the day, her career doesn't depend on this drama. Her music does, and she knows that. Other female rappers were watching this whole situation closely. Some posted subtle messages of support for Doechii. Others stayed completely silent. And that silence was interesting too, because it suggested they knew. They knew this wasn't real protection. They knew this energy wouldn't last. They knew next week, next month, when they faced disrespect, these same men wouldn't show up. So why comment? Why engage? Why give it validity? The silence from other women in the industry was its own form of commentary, a refusal to participate in the performance, a quiet acknowledgement that this changes nothing. Brands started trying to capitalize too. Clothing companies released limited edition Protect Black Women merch. Streaming platforms pushed playlists featuring Doechii and other black female artists. Everyone wanted a piece of the moment. Everyone wanted to look like they cared. But it was all so transparently opportunistic, so clearly about profit, not principle. And people noticed. The comments under those brand posts were brutal. People called out the virtue signaling, the commodification, the fact that these same brands stay silent on other issues affecting black women. It was a masterclass in how capitalism absorbs resistance and sells it back to you.
What we're seeing here is so much bigger than one incident or one artist or one moment of outrage. This is about the foundational relationship between hip-hop and black women, and that relationship has always been transactional. Black women are celebrated when they're useful, when they fit a certain mold, when they make men look good or feel good or sound good. But the second they need something, the second they demand respect or protection or basic humanity, the response is conditional, selective, performative. And this situation with Doechii just put that dynamic on full display for everyone to see. The pattern is always the same, and it's been running for decades. First, they doubt her success. They question whether she's really talented or just connected. They ask who's writing her bars, who's producing her tracks, who's funding her career. Then they spread rumors, drug use, sexual behavior, secret relationships, anything to discredit her. Then they call her fake, an industry plant, a puppet, something manufactured rather than authentic. Then they strip her authorship, say she doesn't deserve her success, that she got lucky, that someone handed it to her. And finally, they withhold respect. Even when she proves herself, even when she wins, even when she dominates, the respect never comes. Or it comes so late it doesn't matter anymore. Hip-hop has been running this playbook since the beginning, and every generation of black women in the industry has faced it. From Lauryn Hill to Missy Elliott to Nicki Minaj to Megan Thee Stallion, the details change, but the pattern stays the same. So when people act shocked that Doechii faced this treatment, it reveals how little they've been paying attention. This isn't new, this is the norm. What was different this time was the response. And even that response was flawed, because it wasn't actually about her. It was about men reasserting control, reminding everyone that they decide who gets protected and when. The responsibility of addressing this doesn't just fall on individual men, it falls on the entire infrastructure of hip-hop, the labels, the media, the platforms, the fans. Everyone who participates in this culture has to ask themselves what they're willing to tolerate, what they're willing to ignore, what they're willing to excuse. Because staying silent is a choice, looking away is a choice, and those choices have consequences. They create an environment where black women are disposable, where their pain is entertainment, where their humanity is optional. And until that changes fundamentally, nothing else will. When you constantly build a culture on the degradation of black women, you're not just creating music or content, you're creating a worldview. You're teaching people that black women don't deserve the same care, the same protection, the same respect. And then you act surprised when that lesson gets learned, when people internalize it, when they act on it. Adin Ross didn't invent disrespect for black women, he learned it, and hip-hop was one of his teachers. So the outrage directed at him without any self-reflection from the industry is hypocritical. It's deflection. It's refusing to look in the mirror and acknowledge complicity. This situation is a warning for anybody with a platform or influence in hip-hop. The more you perform protection without doing the actual work of creating safety, the more people will see through it. The audience isn't stupid. They're watching, they're taking notes, and they're building receipts. The next time a black woman in hip-hop faces harm and the response is silence, people will remember this moment. They'll remember who showed up and why. They'll remember the inconsistency, and the credibility of these so-called protectors will be gone. You can't fake solidarity forever. Eventually, the performance cracks, and what's underneath gets exposed. So what really happened here? Let's strip away all the noise and the performance and the outrage and ask the uncomfortable question. Did hip-hop finally wake up? Did something click? Did men in the industry suddenly realize they'd been failing black women and decide to change? Or did powerful men simply feel embarrassed by Adin Ross? Did they feel disrespected? Did they see an opportunity to reassert dominance and flex their cultural authority? Because if this was really about Doechii, if this was really about protecting black women, then why didn't they defend Megan? Why didn't they defend Cardi? Why didn't they defend Lotto? Why didn't they defend every other black woman who faced public harassment and degradation? The timeline doesn't lie. Years of silence followed by one explosive moment. That's not evolution, that's convenience, that's opportunism. That's finding an acceptable target and unleashing rage that should have been directed inward. Because the real enemy isn't Adin Ross, he's just a symptom. The real enemy is the culture that taught him black women are acceptable targets, and that culture is hip-hop itself. Until the industry is willing to confront that truth, everything else is theater, everything else is performance, everything else is a distraction from the actual work that needs to be done. Some people want to believe this was a turning point, that maybe this incident will spark real change, that maybe men in hip-hop finally understand the harm they've been complicit in. And I hope that's true, I genuinely do. But evidence isn't hope, and the evidence suggests this was a one-time explosion, a moment of performative rage that made people feel good, but won't translate to lasting change. Because lasting change requires accountability, it requires admitting fault, it requires giving up power. And there's no indication that's happening. What's more likely is this. Next week, there will be a new controversy, a new scandal, a new viral moment, and everyone will forget about Doechii. The defenders will move on, the outrage will fade, and the next time a black woman in hip-hop faces harm, the response will be silence. Again. Because the cycle hasn't been broken, it's just been paused. And the women who live inside this industry know that. They're not celebrating this moment, they're bracing for the next betrayal. They're preparing for the next time they'll need protection and it won't come, or it'll come with conditions, or it'll come too late to matter. The speculation around this situation is wild. Some people think it was coordinated, that a group of men in hip-hop decided this was the moment to make a stand. Others think it was organic, that genuine anger boiled over and created a movement. But the truth is probably somewhere in between. Some of it was genuine, some of it was strategic, some of it was about Doechii, most of it was about ego, and all of it revealed more about hip-hop's failures than its virtues. Because real protection doesn't need to be loud, it doesn't need to be violent, it doesn't need to be performative. Real protection is consistent, quiet, and unconditional. And that's not what happened here. The silence after the storm will be the most telling part. Once the cameras are off, once the tweets stop, once the podcasts move to the next topic, what happens then? Does Doechii get the support she needs? Do black women in hip-hop feel safer? Does the culture actually change its behavior? Or does everything go back to normal? My guess is the latter, because changing culture is hard. Changing yourself is harder, and admitting you've been wrong for decades is nearly impossible. So the cycle will continue, and the next black woman who needs protection will face the same conditional, selective, performative response, or worse, no response at all. Hip-hop says it stood up for Doechii. The headlines say black men finally protected a black woman. The social media posts say this was a turning point, a moment of growth, a sign that things are changing. But the leaked truth, the receipts, the pattern, the history, all of it suggests something far darker. This was never about protecting a black woman. This was about protecting male power. This was about reasserting cultural authority. This was about punishing an outsider who embarrassed the culture. And Doechii, the actual human being at the center of this, she was just the excuse, the symbol, the prop in someone else's battle. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the pattern, you'll recognize it every single time it happens again. Because it will happen again. Another black woman will face harm. Another moment will demand a response. And the same men who exploded over Doechii will be silent. Or worse, they'll be complicit. And we'll all be reminded that protection in hip-hop isn't a right, it's a privilege. And that privilege is granted based on optics, not need. Based on convenience, not care. Based on how good it makes men look, not how safe it makes women feel. So, I'm asking you, do you think this was real growth? Do you think hip-hop finally learned its lesson? Do you think the men who defended Doechii will show up next time? Or do you think this was just another brutal culture war between men using a black woman as collateral? Do you think the outrage was genuine or performative? Do you think the industry will hold itself accountable or just move on to the next controversy? Drop your take in the comments because this conversation is far from over. This story is still unfolding. More details are going to surface. More contradictions are going to be exposed, and the truth is going to get even messier. Make sure you like this video, hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update because we're covering every twist, every leak, every revelation that comes out. I appreciate you for rocking with me through this deep dive. This wasn't an easy story to break down because it's not just about one incident. It's about decades of harm, about patterns of behavior, about a culture that claims to love black women but refuses to protect them consistently. Stay safe out there, stay critical, and remember, the loudest voices aren't always the most genuine. Sometimes the people performing protection are the same ones who created the danger in the first place. I'll see you in the next one.